So David Pakman is just quick, since Demi doesn't know who he is, and in case some of our viewers don't know who he is a left-wing commentator. He's on YouTube. He talks about the news, usually from a Democratic left-wing perspective. He supported Joe Biden. He supported Kamala Harris. But he has a reputation for being kind of like an ass licker. He is very much like a corporate Democratic fan, neoliberal, not very much a leftist, like a real leftist, like who supports like Bernie Sanders and like Medicare for all and like really raising the taxes on the rich. He's kind of like your middle of the road, neoliberal Democrat, supports Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself, but I do support the Palestinians, but like Gaza should be able to, Israel should be able to defend itself. All that sort of thing. But he doesn't really have much of a good reputation amongst people who consume leftist media. Like, for example, I trust someone like Mike Figueredo from the Humanist Report a lot more. People like Fran Fino from TYT, Matt Lieb's wife. The Vanguard, but the Vanguard is kind of more of like a comedic take. People like the Majority Report. Those are the people that I kind of agree with mostly when it comes to left media on YouTube. Breaking points, like I really like Crystal. I really like Kyle Kalinske, Hassan Piker. Someone like David Pakman never spoke to me, never meant anything to me. Yesterday, I was looking at Instagram and I saw that Ethan Klein shared parts of a David Pakman video on his Instagram story because he agrees with David Pakman. And David Pakman was talking about how he feels judged for the Israel thing. He says that, like, I agree with Democrats like 95% of the way, but that the Israel thing makes them think of me as less than, and they don't think I'm a real liberal. So let's listen to his video kind of complaining about how his support for Israel disqualifies him from being a real leftist and how he's sick of, the purity tests, etc. And I just find all that shit absurd. And the fact that Ethan Klein agrees with this and felt compelled enough to share this on his stories means that there's something very wrong with what David Pakman is saying here. So let's watch.
I've talked before about how the left sometimes has this instinct to exclude people over relatively small disagreements, while the right, at least when it's time to win elections, tends to really be inclusive in this just vote for us kind of way. Come on in. You can support Trump but hate vaccines, be anti-tax but pro-labor, think the 2020 election...
Yeah, New York Anthony, NY Anthony says he's a liberal Democrat, a diehard blue no matter who voter, which I am not. I am very picky when it comes to Democrats. I don't just vote for anyone because they're a Democrat. You have to earn my vote. I don't vote for anyone based on party, etc. So yeah, let's keep going.
Was stolen or just had issues, but you're still in their group, at least for the purposes of winning elections, getting power, and then getting to legislate. The right accepts all of it until the election in order to win. But what we see on the left often is that if you disagree on one issue even slightly, you'll sometimes end up being treated like you're not really part of the movement at all. You're otherized. And it's what Sigmund Freud called the narcissism of small differences. We save sometimes our harshest energy for people who are mostly like us, just not quite enough. And this isn't some theory, this is really everywhere. Think about the Bernie versus Warren feud from 2020 and how it got so vicious that supporters who agreed on 90% of policy, maybe 95% of policy, started treating each other like they were enemies. And the reality is that there was very little daylight between Bernie and Warren. In fact, they were assessed at the time as the two most left senators.
If I recall correctly, Elizabeth Warren started to accuse Bernie of like doing sexist attacks against her and saying that she couldn't be president because she was a woman. So like when Bernie was like her friend for a long time, you know what I mean? And she like betrayed Bernie and tried to paint him as like a fucking sexist and that he was against her running for becoming president. So I thought that was a fucking low blow from Elizabeth Warren. And then she had a few other attacks on Bernie, even though he refused to ever say anything negative about her. I thought they would have made a great ticket. I thought it should have been Bernie as president and Elizabeth Warren as his VP. She fucking betrayed Bernie, bro. So I don't know what the fuck David Pakman is talking about here, but I'm not surprised by the way of how he's framing this issue because he's just a little bitch. Back to David Pakman.
Senate. But from how their supporters were fighting with each other, you would have thought it was like, Marx versus Milton Friedman or something like that. I even got sucked into it a little bit when I said in 2020, I prefer Bernie, but I'd be happy with Elizabeth Warren. These are the two most left-wing senators in the Senate. I got furious emails. How dare you, you right-winger? We knew you were a neo-lib this entire time. So that was Bernie Warren in 2020. Another example, defund the police. For some, defund the police became a line in the sand where anyone like me who wanted reform but didn't like the slogan and maybe thought that actually just flat out defunding isn't really the solution, we were written off as compromised. Oh, you've been, big law enforcement is paying you. The DNC has given.
I don't think that's as much of a case. I mean, I get what the term defund the police means. And usually like when you're making like a slogan, you want it to be more extreme so that you get some kind of a compromise. You say defund the police, asks to defund it, and then the compromise is going to be reform. If you ask for reform, you're not going to get shit. You know what I mean? So ask for the extreme. What is it like? If you ask for a full loaf, you get half a loaf. If you ask for half a loaf, you get crumbs. So might as well ask for the full loaf, compromise, and then you'll get sort of the thing that you actually wanted. So that, and I don't see anyone really kicking anyone out of the Democratic Party for not wanting to actually defund the police. But also, F the police while we're at it.
Money so that you don't support defund. No, I mean, I laid out a 10-point plan, which included reform, response by non-armed individuals to certain types of calls, training, ending low-effort policing, all this stuff. But I just didn't think that defund made sense as a slogan or as a practice. I was brutally attacked for that. I'm on the right, all this stuff. Another example, there are people on the left who have, maybe we'd call them more nuanced views on trans athletes in sports. Everybody would be pro-trans rights in just about every way. We agree about dignity and all this different stuff. But there are some people who say, hey, you know what? There are some sports in which I think there's an issue of fairness here. Some of them get branded as bigots and told, you're not part of this.
I think that's pretty extreme. I do understand that the trans athletes in sports is very complicated, and in most cases, there's John Oliver made a great sort of like 40-minute study on that, or like a segment on trans athletes, and there was a trans sort of a scientist that was kind of talking about how it just really depends on the sports. There are sports where it matters if an athlete is trans. There are sports where it doesn't matter if an athlete is trans. I just say look at the science, whatever makes sense ultimately. Does it make sense to say that all trans athletes should be able to compete in all sports? I don't think so. I think there are going to be some cases where people have a physical advantage. There are going to be cases where people have the doctor was explaining on how there are sports where trans male athletes have a disadvantage because their bodies are too big, for example. And it's actually a disadvantage in certain sports, like let's say like synchronized swimming. I'm just throwing out an example. Sometimes if you're a trans male athlete, that gives you a disadvantage. So it's such a complex issue. And for people to just try to make it a simple yes or no, and I'm still learning about it. Like my opinion on it is changing with time. The more science there is, the more people learn, the more these sports authorities make that knowledge public. They make it clearer for people. There's going to be less fear, less confusion around it. And I think hopefully a few years from now, we would have found a solution that makes everyone happy.
Same movement that I'm part of. Wow. And then even when people agree with the general direction of the left, the second they use the slightly wrong language or they're not loud enough at the right moment, they get accused of being only performative allies or whatever, as if being imperfect disqualifies you completely. This is personal too, by the way. I've spoken out strongly in favor of an independent Palestinian state against.
Everyone Plays Games said Fran had a dumb take on this issue. I think she had a slightly extreme take. I think she was being asked like, what if Floyd Mayweather wanted to compete in women's boxing? She was like, yeah, sure, he should be able to. I think in that case, this is a pretty extreme case where I don't even think that example would ever apply. Like nothing like that would ever happen. So even entertaining that example is kind of extreme and insane. But like, yeah, I kind of disagree with that point because that is a bit of an extreme example.
Israeli settlements against Benjamin Netanyahu. But I've also said I don't support the BDS movement. I don't support calling for the elimination of Israel. I don't.
Yeah, no, New York, NY Anthony says trans athletes make less than 0.5% of all professional and collegiate competitors. Exactly. The amount of time that people spend talking about trans athletes, you'd think that for every 10 non-trans athletes, there are 7 trans athletes waiting in the wings ready to take someone's place. So it's such a minor issue, whether in high school, whether in college, whether in professional sports. The amount of time that people spend talking about this, again, this is all just a distraction. People want you to fight your neighbors. They want to turn left versus right, all these social issues. social wars when we should be focused on the 1% versus the 99% of us, and wealth inequality and income inequality. But they just want us to focus on fuck the Mexicans, fuck the trans athletes, where it's like, what are you talking about?
Support those things, but I support all the other stuff I just mentioned. You all know I've had people say I'm not part of the real left. I'm actually a right winger with my beliefs. I've been excluded by people whose views I mostly share because I only signed off on 92%, not 100% of what they believe. So why does this happen? This is the critical part. I just finished reading the book, The Status Game by Will Storr. And in the book, he explains that a lot of this behavior is about how people try to gain status in their communities. And in many left-wing spaces, the way to earn status is by being morally pure. This is where the phrase purity test comes from. Proving.
This is the part that Ethan had on his stories, basically.
You're the most principled, you're the most correct, you're the most uncompromising, you're the most left-wing. And Storr leans on the work of...
JC Ramirez says, this is worse than your lawsuit take, I'm gonna be honest. What exactly did I say that is that bad? JC Ramirez, please clarify in the comments.
Jason Manning and Bradley Campbell.
Again, because you guys see, this is such a sensitive topic that, like, all I said was there are some sports where trans athletes, it could make sense where maybe they couldn't compete based on what a trans scientist said, and then even just saying that, some people are going to say that, like, you have a bad take. So it's a really and honestly, I don't even enjoy talking about that topic because of how sensitive it is and how offended people can get, and for right or wrong reasons. Like, everyone has the right to be offended and to take things a certain way. But, like, again, I don't think I said anything out of the norm, but some people are going to take things a certain way. Nothing we could do. Live show must go on, baby.
It's not about who's wrong or right or distracting people. It's also about there should be one kind of rule that's applied to everything. Not like some sports are like this and some sports, like, that's prejudiced. You're supposed to just make one equal thing for everyone, just like how there's like rules for men and women.
I know, but it doesn't work like that, I guess, with sports, because different sports, different physical attributes, and different. I'm not really qualified to talk about it at all, you know.
Who describe a shift in what they call a victimhood culture. In that culture, status comes from being seen as a victim or defending victims more strongly than anybody else does. And when that's the game, what you end up with is people constantly calling each other out, not just to make things better, but to prove their own virtue, to win points, because they are the ones doing the calling out. So what ends up is that instead of building coalitions, the left ends up policing its own ranks. The right rewards loyalty, and the left often rewards purity. And that difference is showing up at the ballot box. If we want to win, we have to stop turning minor disagreements into disqualifications, because then we'll just keep losing.
So I'm going to go back. I'm getting distracted by the chat, so I'm going to stop looking at the chat for a second. This is why we need someone here looking at chat. I'm going to go back a little bit.
Most principled, you're the most correct, you're the most uncompromising, you're the most left-wing. And Storr leans on the work of Jason Manning and Bradley Campbell, who describe a shift in what they call a victimhood culture. In that culture, status comes from being seen as a victim or defending victims more strongly than anybody else does. And when that's the game, what you end up with is people constantly calling each other out, not just to make things better, but to prove their own virtue.
I don't fully disagree with him here. I know where he's going, and I'm gonna disagree with a lot of what he's saying later. But, like, yes, there are some people, like, on Twitter, on social media, that will just virtue signal, that are just gonna try to make themselves look better than other people without actually doing any of the work behind the scenes, without doing anything to help. It's like, hey, you did this, you're a piece of shit, I'm better than you for that. But you also have to do the work offline to back up what it is you're saying and preaching on the internet. But there is a lot of sort of grandstanding and moral grandstanding and pretending to be more pure than that. I'd say, look, I'm going to give David Pakman a bit of credit. He's not entirely wrong there.
Points, because they are the ones doing the calling out. So what ends up is that instead of building coalitions, the left ends up policing its own ranks. The right rewards loyalty, and the left often rewards purity. And that difference is showing up at the ballot box. If we want to win, we have to stop turning minor disagreements into disqualifications, because then we'll just keep losing. If you don't build the tent, grow the tent, you shrink it, and then you lose power. And there's this idea that if you let more people in who aren't pure, you actually shrink the tent, when in reality you're growing it. So I would like to see it go differently the next couple of election cycles, and let's see if it makes a difference. After researching, writing...
I was looking at the chat when he was talking about the Israel-Palestine thing, and I fucking skipped it, bro. I should stop looking at chat when I'm doing this.
Language, or they're not loud enough at the right moment, they get accused of being only performative allies or whatever, as if being imperfect disqualifies you completely. This is personal too, by the way. I've spoken out strongly in favor of an independent Palestinian
There
state.
we go. Sorry, I thought I skipped this. I was listening to the whole thing, waiting for him to get to Palestine. So yeah, so this is crazy to me, right? I agree with most of what Democrats believe, except Israel should exist. So it's literally like saying, hey, I agree with all people. I agree with Democrats. I agree we should raise taxes on the rich. I agree, gay people should have rights, trans people should have rights. But I mean, I also agree that rapists should be allowed to rape. Hey, I agree with you guys on everything else, 95%. We just have a little difference on the rapist thing. Isn't that okay? And aren't I still welcome in your club? Like, bro, supporting genocide? Get the fuck out of here, bro. That's not a small 5 to 2% difference. If you support the existence of a Jewish ethno-state where the only way it can exist is by imprisoning 2 million Palestinians in an open-air prison called Gaza, and then illegal settling over in the West Bank and murdering people and kicking them out of their lands. If you believe that country should exist, you can go fuck yourself, bro. You do not belong in any group called a liberal, a progressive, a humanitarian, bro. What the fuck are you talking about? Sorry, we're rewatching this, by the way.
Against Israeli settlements, against Benjamin Netanyahu. But I've also said I don't support the BDS movement.
He doesn't even support the BDS movement. He doesn't even support just the act of boycotting products, boycotting companies, boycotting things that could discourage other people from working with Israeli companies and from normalizing the existence of an apartheid Jewish supremacy state. Douche Canoe sends $5 and says the Kamala campaign tried to extend the tent, bringing in conservative voters, and it failed horribly. David's strategy doesn't work. Exactly. Well, Kamala, this is why you need to extend the tent, but in the other direction. Try to extend it more to the left. Try to bring in more leftists instead of excluding leftists, and try to bring in conservatives and centrists who are never really going to vote and support you. So that's never going to work. Let's continue watching.
Support calling for the elimination of Israel. I don't support those things, but I support all the other stuff I just mentioned. You all know I've had people say I'm not part of the real left. I'm actually a right-winger with my beliefs. I've been excluded by people whose view...
Right-winger, left-winger, it doesn't matter. You're just a piece of shit, bro. Anyone who believes that Israel should exist, just ask yourself, what is the cost of Israel existing? And if you're okay, once you say that out loud, well, the cost of Israel existing is X amount of million Palestinians being kicked out of their homes, Palestinians living in an open-air prison, Palestinians not having the right to leave the Gaza Strip, hundreds and thousands of checkpoints if they need to get to the city, all sorts of shit, humanitarian aid being blocked from going into their homes. They're now about to get kicked out of Gaza and they want to throw them out to the rest of the world. Whatever you want. If you're okay with all of that shit, this is what it takes to keep Israel alive. The Israel that you know and love, that's what it takes to keep it alive. If you're okay with that, then you're a piece of shit. Not only are you not a Democrat or Republican, you're just a fucking piece of shit human, bro.
I mostly share because I only signed off on 92%, not 100% of what they...
Well, that 8%, my guy, is pretty fucked up. That 8% covers genocide, not letting aid into places, murdering women and children by the thousands on a daily basis for over a year and a half. Yeah, that's kind of fucking disqualifying, bro. Wouldn't you fucking say, David fucking Pakman?
So why does this happen? This is the critical part. I just finished reading the book, The Status Game by Will Storr. And in the book, he explains that a lot of this behavior is about how people try to gain status in their community.
Super Guy Bob sends $5 and says the one issue they pretend is a small little wedge issue is literally genocide. Exactly. It's just this one little thing. We agree. Look, Ethan Klein says it. I agree with you on 99%. It's just the one thing. I think Israel should exist. I think, Hamas hides military bases under hospitals. I mean, what is Israel supposed to do? It's just this one thing. Everything else are the same. Gay people should have rights. Aren't I a nice person? Aren't I a good person? That's not how it fucking works, bro. You support genocide, you're a piece of shit.